It was the greatest land grab in American history. Under the guise of civilizing Native Americans, the U.S. government launched a calculated assault on tribal sovereignty. Through the Dawes Act of 1887, millions of acres of native land were carved up, not for indigenous prosperity, but for white expansion. And at the heart of this betrayal, a fraud so blatant it had a price tag, $5. The Dawes Act promised a simple trade-off. Native Americans would abandon communal land ownership in exchange for individual plots and U.S. citizenship. But in reality, this was a systematic effort to strip indigenous people of their lands and heritage. Government officials, eager to accommodate manifest destiny, sold off native land to white settlers at bargain prices. But some didn't want to wait. With just $5 in bribes, thousands of white Americans falsely registered as Indians on the Dawes rolls, gaining access to land, resources, and government benefits meant for native families. Meanwhile, the true heirs to these lands, the indigenous people themselves, were left with nothing. The final blow came with the Curtis Act of 1898. Unlike the Dawes Act, which targeted individual land ownership, the Curtis Act dismantled entire tribal governments, stripping the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole nations of their autonomy. White settlers and non-native officials were now allowed to vote in tribal affairs, shifting political power away from indigenous leaders. It was colonization rebranded, less with weapons, more with ink and bureaucracy. As native lands were stolen, another form of erasure took place. The copper-colored black Native Americans, many of whom had lived among indigenous nations for generations, were systematically stripped of their identity and rights. The U.S. government classified black Native Americans separately, ensuring they received neither land nor federal benefits. While white Americans bought their way into native identity, actual indigenous people, especially those of darker complexion, were erased from the record. Today, tribal casinos generate billions of dollars in revenue. But behind the flashing lights and grand claims of native prosperity lies a bitter truth. Many of these casinos are not actually run by Native Americans. With native lands stolen and tribal authority weakened, outside investors moved in. The same government that enabled white Americans to steal land now regulates who controls its wealth, ensuring that much of the money never reaches indigenous communities. The fight isn't over. Legal battles continue, demanding land reparations, financial restitution, and the restoration of Native and Black Native identities. Historians estimate that the U.S. government owes indigenous people hundreds of billions in stolen wealth, yet to this day, justice remains elusive. For generations, America has profited from stolen land and stolen identities. The story of the $5 Indian is not just a historical fraud, it's a living injustice. Until the real descendants of these lands are recognized, the theft continues. The land remembers, the people remember. Now the world must remember too.